pitching is so individual. That's the thing. It's trying to convey a vision that you have to a group of people that you don't know. And it's inherently difficult. And I think, besides this idea I have of how to organize your thoughts about the pitching, I think the biggest thing I say to people, and I actually might say it today in the second session, is that unlike other businesses, we are in the business of giving audiences emotional experiences. It could be sadness, it could be adrenaline, it could be horror, but the point is we want our audience to feel something. And when you're pitching a story, really the key thing you have to get across is that the audience is going to have a response to it. And the best tool you have is your own response to it. And I think it's natural for anyone to walk into a room of strangers to sort of clam up and get tight inside and be afraid to reveal one's own inner life, one's own feelings, one's passion, that sort of thing. And it's the very thing you have to get over when you pitch. The thing you're selling is that experience, and you want the people in the room to have that experience. So that's what I tell people. I say it's very interesting. It's very similar to what you say to actors. That actors, when they audition, have to go into a room and we use the expression get naked, that in some way take off that armor that protects them, because it's what's underneath is what's going to allow for the response of the people you're pitching to. So to me, that's the other big piece of it. Storytelling in the context of scripted, whatever it is, movie, television, that sort of thing, is telling a story through the actions of people. Very, very complicated. A novelist can tell a story through the inner life of someone. I don't have that luxury when I am writing a script. I can have a voiceover, I can have a narration, but the truth is you have to tell the story through behavior, and behavior means relationships, and relationships mean characters. And so therefore, there's a skill set you have to develop to understand what makes a character a viable dramatic character. What are the stepping stones of a story, that there's a logic in dramatic storytelling that doesn't exist in real life, which is to say that A leads to B leads to C. In real life, it doesn't happen that way. Real life just meanders along, and that's why we have drama, because we're trying to organize the chaos of real life. But there has to be an inexorable logic to dramatic storytelling, where you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have a dilemma, you have the conflict brought about by that dilemma, you have the various ways in which the people try to work it out, and then you come to a point of decision. And that can, take various forms. It can be a shootout, or it could be a moment of epiphany that a character has. But nevertheless, storytelling is about change, that moment of change, that moment where things are going to be different from here on out. Understanding how to do that is the most difficult and the most important thing that a producer needs to know. There were a couple of moments in my career that were really defining for me as a person. The first one I have to say would be the first TV movie that I ever did. Ed Zwick and I were already partners, and we came up with this idea of doing a story about a nuclear incident as if it was a live news broadcast. It ended up being called Special Bulletin. And in the course of the year of making that film, both Ed and I experienced these unbelievably intense, sort of life-changing experiences. First of all, he got married. My father was diagnosed with brain cancer. His mother was killed in a car accident. I had my first child. My father died. We bought our first house, and 2 days, literally 2 days after my father died, we won 4 Emmys for this program that we had made. And so this strange sort of collision of life and art, where we're doing a story about blowing up Charleston with a nuclear bomb, and our lives are blown up while we're doing it, in good and bad ways, by the way. I think it set both Ed and I on a path for the next 20 years of storytelling, where we somehow felt that you weren't succeeding as a storyteller unless you grabbed the audience by the throat and strangled them within an inch of their lives emotionally. You know, we became dark in some way. I always think of that expression that comedians use where they said, "I killed tonight. I went out there and killed." That's what we thought. We thought you had to kill the audience, that you had to make them cry, that you had to grab them so hard, because that was our experience of life, you know. And there were many criticisms of 30-something, which came, you know, like not long after that, that somehow, we were too harsh, we were too dark, whatever, you know. And I think that came out of this life experience that we had that was so defining for us. The other one, it sort of goes completely in the other direction, which is that when we started doing 30-something, we sold the pilot. People loved the pilot. You know, we got great feedback, and we sold the series. And we were these young guys, and we didn't really know what we were doing. We understood what we were doing as filmmakers, but as making a TV show and dealing with a network, we were just flying blind. And as we started doing the episodes, before we're on the air, I had this sinking feeling that we were just ruining the show, just that it wasn't living up to our dream of what our television show should be. And it started to eat away at me day after day, that I was just making this failure. It was just, you know, not only a failure, but it was going to be this public failure, that it was going to be this disaster, and that everyone would see it. And I finally had this moment, you know, where I sort of had to confront myself and say, okay, you've done this thing, it doesn't work, just accept it. You know, it's gonna be this really public, we weren't even on the air yet, you know, and we were just making episodes, and I'm thinking they're pieces of shit, it's not working. And I said, you've got to accept it. You just have to accept that you've done this thing and you've failed, and just accept the shame. And what was interesting was that once I accepted the shame that this thing was not perfect, because that's really what I was upset about, that it wasn't living up to my dreams or my standards, I was kind of amazed at how many good things you could do on something that was basically a piece of shit. In other words, that once I changed my frame of reference, I was able to enjoy the good things that we were able to do on the show, because I wasn't expecting perfection. All of this took place before it went on the air. Then it went on the air, and everyone, you know, sort of made all this hoopla about it. And I was just amused at that point, because I had gone through such this intense internal drama about the idea of what it means to be imperfect, and having to accept the fact that my work was imperfect. And it freed me ever since, in some way. In other words, I never felt the need to be perfect ever since then. What I decided was, if something was truly alive, that was better than being perfect. And if it's alive, it can make mistakes. And that's what I've really sort of sought ever since, is to just, is this thing truly living? I mean, I tend to be an optimist in general. I tend to think that things will work out. I mean, I don't, you know, it doesn't stop me from freaking out at times. But in this case, experience helps. I mean, over time, you realize that everything you do is going to have 2 or 3 moments where you're convinced it's dead. And so now when it happens, I go, oh, okay, this is one of those moments where I'm convinced this thing is never going to work. That doesn't mean it's not going to work. It just means this is one of those moments. So I think, you know, we tend to over-dramatize in our business anyway. I mean, you know, in general, we're not dealing with life and death issues. And it's important to remember that. It's important to remember that we're well paid for what we do, and that it's a privilege to be in this business. And, you know, shit happens, and your heart gets broken a lot. I mean, that is the truth of this business. Your heart gets broken a lot. And the more heart you have, the more idealistic you are, the more you work from a place of idealism or wanting to really get something across to an audience, the more smashed in the head you're going to get. And at some point, you either have to get out or just accept that that's what life is, that most of the time, most of the time it's not going to work. So I think mostly it's just the years, that's all. You know, it's funny, the Producers Guild is not a union, and a lot of people don't understand that. We don't go out on strike, we can't, we're legally not allowed to. We can't demand anything from the studios, and in some ways we're powerless, and the first to admit it. And it's upsetting at times because I wish we could go out on strike. I wish we could demand, you know, better treatment for producers in certain ways. But because we are quote unquote powerless in that way, because we're not a union, it's opened up a whole different avenue that's been amazing for me to witness, which is that other than the American Film Institute, and I'm not talking about the school, I'm talking about the organization as a whole, the PGA is really the only entity in our business that exists for the public good in the business. In other words, we just want the business to be better. We want people to treat each other better. We want working circumstances to be better. You know, it gives us a kind of a moral high ground that very often has worked in our favor, that we can go to studios and say, you know what, you need to do this because it's the right thing. Not because it's going to make you money, not because it's going to make us money. You know, taking self-interest out of it has sometimes allowed us to get more done. And the other piece of it for me has been just how incredible it is to be around other producers. You know, I go to these meetings and people, you know, they want to solve the problem. They want to get home as soon as possible. They want to just move through it. I realize, oh, I'm in a meeting full of grown-ups. You know, I'm not, you know, there's nobody in here who's in here just to hear themselves talk. You know, there's nobody in here who has a huge ego. It's like producers on movies and television shows have to be the grown-ups. So when you're among a group of these grown-ups, it's kind of fun.